has had for the last 20 years. But some political honchos, some politicians in the valley in particular have taken exception to it. One of them is the National Conference leader Omar Abdullah, the former chief minister, who says this is almost like seeking foreign validation for the elections in Kashmir, and that the Modi government, he is accusing the Modi government of seeking some kind of foreign stamp of approval after the abrogation of Article 370. His contention is, while on the one hand you say you don't care about any kind of foreign interference or foreign stamp of approval as far as Kashmir is concerned, you don't care about opinion pieces that are written in the Western press, but at the same time, by allowing observers, you are actually looking for validation. That's his contention. Well, the government and the supporters of the government, the central government that is, are saying that this has nothing to do about looking for validation. This is simply about setting the right narrative, and that is, this is the first time we've had an assembly election, not just in the last 5 years, not just since the abrogation of Article 370. This is the first assembly election we've had in almost a decade in the valley. It's been very peaceful. There is absolutely no major incident of violence that's been reported in the last two phases. The voter turnout is well above 60%, which is much higher than what it was in the last assembly election. If this should not be projected or must not be projected, then what should? That's the question that's coming in from the BJP and the central government. But first, let's get to the story and break it down for you.
I don't know why foreigners should be asked to check elections. When foreign governments comment, then Government of India says this is an internal matter for India. Now suddenly they want foreign observers to come and look at our elections. These are an internal matter for us. We don't need their certificate.
जिस जम्मू कश्मीर में कहा जाता था कि यहाँ चुनाव का तो बाइकाट होता है, यहाँ पर चुनाव तो अलगाववादियों और आतंकवादियों के साए में होता है, वहाँ का चुनाव जो है लोगों के पार्टिसिपेशन के साथ, लोगों के जुनून और जज्बे के साथ, लोकतंत्र के प्रति समर्पण की भावना के साथ हो रहा है।
All right, so now foreign observers are not new to Jammu and Kashmir. They have visited during times of elections and they've visited even otherwise. In October of 2019, just a few months after the abrogation of Article 370, a delegation of about 24 odd EU members of parliament visited Srinagar to assess the situation there. In January of 2020, 15 foreign envoys visited Srinagar. It was a two-day visit to assess whether normalcy is returned after the abrogation of Article 370. In February 2021, 24 foreign envoys were invited by the centre to showcase development projects in Jammu and Kashmir. In May 2023, G20 diplomats, remember India hosted the G20 summit in September of 2023, G20 diplomats visited Srinagar for a dialogue on the untapped potential of Jammu and Kashmir tourism. In fact, it was a summit on the sidelines of the G20 in the run-up to the G20 that was actually hosted in Srinagar, and this became a talking point about the return of normalcy in Kashmir. In August of 2024, a delegation of US diplomats met with Omar Abdullah in his residence in Srinagar to discuss some of the travel advisories that the US government issues periodically. Now, foreign delegations have also been invited to observe how India conducts elections. It's happened for a number of years now. In fact, the Election Commission of India runs something called an International Election Visitors Program, an IEVP, which has been in existence since 2004. For the last 20 years, from time to time, foreign observers come and observe how elections in India are conducted. As recently as April 2024, 25 global political parties were invited by the centre to have a ringside view of the Lok Sabha polls as well as the campaign. In May 2024, 75 visitors from the election bodies of at least 23 countries witnessed how the Lok Sabha elections were carried out. And like I said, this program that the Election Commission has been running since 2004, called the International Election Visitors Program, has encouraged visitors from political parties, visitors who are foreign diplomats, who serve in their respective missions here in New Delhi, to come and see how democracy functions at the grassroots level in our country. So, why such a huge fuss? Why kick up such a storm? That's the question we're asking on Brass Tacks. Ajay Alok is national spokesperson of the BJP, Amitabh Dubey, national spokesperson of the Congress Party, Ifra Jan, spokesperson of the National Conference, Aarti Singh Tikku is a senior journalist who's been covering Kashmir for a number of years now, and Professor Amitabh Mattu is Dean and Professor at the School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Let me start with the political spokespersons. Ajay Alok, the contention from Omar Abdullah and others, mainstream Valley politicians, is that the Indian government, while on the one hand, you are seeking validation, as they say, from these foreign observers by allowing them to come and observe elections here in India. On the other hand, you say, Kashmir is an integral part. We don't care about foreign interference. There should be no foreign interference. It is wholly India's integral and internal affair. Then why do you need such foreign delegations to come, observe, and perhaps validate?
See, Zaka, Kashmir is an integral part of the country, there is no doubt about it. But the perception about Kashmir since the time of independence has repeatedly been damaged by the Congress party and its so-called allies in the valley, like National Conference and all. And to show the world that yes, we are a vibrant and a live democracy and the democracy functions here at the grassroots level. And that's why we had invited and we have invited and we'll keep on inviting the foreign dignitaries to come and visit the election process altogether. Now, who doesn't want these elections to be showcased to the world? Who doesn't want? Naturally, the answer is Pakistan. Pakistan doesn't want the election to happen smoothly. It doesn't want to conduct the election. It doesn't want a peace in the valley. So, and who in India is echoing Pakistan? It's National Conference. They want to bring back 370 back again. They again want do jhanda, do samvidhan, do nishan. So all these things just create a perception, a not healthy perception of Kashmir in the outside world, which we are trying to demolish completely. And with the coming of the foreign delegates and they seeing the election and the high percentage turnout of voting in most of the areas, this leads to a perception that yes, Kashmir is a part of India and is returning back to normalcy and it will prosper.
Okay.
Look at the kind of development that Kashmir had seen, the longest bridge of the world, the Kashmir Mall coming up, G20 delegation, we intentionally did it in Srinagar because we wanted Srinagar to be known as a place where peace exists.
Okay. So let me ask Amitabh Dubey, at the end of these two phases, when a large number of the seats, particularly in Kashmir, have voted, the provisional voter turnout in this phase is well above 60%, which is much higher than what it was in the last assembly election. There have been relatively zero major incidents of violence in this particular election cycle. Are these not things, Mr. Amitabh Dubey, that need to be showcased and told to the world, especially at a time when the history of Kashmir has been beset with political violence?
So, the BJP has this unhealthy obsession with foreigners' perceptions, bringing outsiders in. Even the ISI was brought into Pathankot after the terrorist attack. But let's let that be. Just a couple of things. One is, I want you to recall, of course, we welcome the restoration of normalcy in Kashmir. It is a process that's been going on for many years under successive governments, and it continues, and this election is an example of it. I want to remind our panelists and your audience that in the 2011 Panchayat elections, election turnout was over 85%. In the 2014 Vidhan Sabha, turnout was 66%. So it's to claim that this is some miracle that the BJP has created in the last few years is inaccurate. Every day or every week, we see terrorist attacks in some or the other part of Jammu. The narrative that the period before was full of violence and this is the only time we have seen some restoration of normalcy is contradicted by the very facts on terrorism. In the last 5 years of the UPA, 1025 people were killed in militant and terrorist violence in Kashmir. In the last 4.5 years, 1069. So the 5-year period of the UPA at the end had fewer killings due to terrorism than the last 4.5 years of this.
No, but Mr. Dubey, I just want to add one clarification there. One clarification there. The number of terrorist incidents, and I'm going back to the year 2019 when Article 370 was abrogated, was over 1,000. The number of terrorist incidents. the number of terrorist incidents so far in this calendar year is in double digits. So surely you cannot make the case that terrorism has not come down. Certainly by number of incidents, it has come down.
Yeah, so my point is that it had actually come down in the last 5 years of the UPA. In the first 5 years of the NDA, it actually went up and has now come down. So this cherry picking of numbers to show that the BJP has done very well is inaccurate.
No, I didn't say I didn't say those words. I didn't say that the BJP has done well or the BJP has not done well. I just wanted to point to or underline the fact that when 370 was abrogated, the narrative was that Kashmir will burn and there'll be rivers of blood and so on and so forth. Whereas 5 years down the line, the data shows, and I'm just going purely by data, the data shows the number of terror incidents has come down quite substantially.
Right, and obviously that's something that we welcome. I don't know who was making these dire forecasts. We have a very clear position on 370 as laid out in our August statement.
Okay.
Today, we are looking forward. We are looking towards the restoration of statehood. We are looking forward to the accounting of 10 years of BJP rule in this election. They are the incumbent. They must answer how J&K has the second highest youth unemployment in the country, how none of or very few of the proposals, industrial proposals they talk about have actually materialized.
Okay, so that's a separate debate, maybe not for tonight. But let me get the other guests also into the conversation. Let me ask Ifra Jan. Ifra Jan, you know, your leader, Mr. Omar Abdullah, former Chief Minister, seems to have taken great umbrage at the fact that foreign observers are coming and observing this election. Now, in August 2024, there was a delegation from the US Embassy, the US mission here in New Delhi, that had gone and called upon Mr. Abdullah in his residence in Srinagar. They spoke about the travel advisories that the US government keeps issuing from time to time about whether to go or whether not to go to Kashmir. This is, of course, for US citizens. As far as foreign observers are concerned, I said this at the top of the program, and since you just joined some time back, the International Election Visitors Program run by the Election Commission has been in place since 2004. Various elections, general elections and state elections, including elections in Jammu and Kashmir, you have had contingents of international observers from various countries, including Bhutan, Mongolia, Philippines, countries in Africa that have from time to time come and observed Indian elections. So what is so extraordinary if they do so in Kashmir today?
I'll tell you what is extraordinary. From times immemorial, ever since the independence of our country, we have always had foreign diplomats coming and visiting our country. We've also had foreign journalists coming and visiting our country and assessing what they felt was right, what they didn't feel was right according to them, and reported. What is happening here is that the BJP government is conducting these guided tours of these diplomats. It gets them, it takes them in a car, it then takes them exactly where they want. But on the contrary, the same government bans the entry of foreign journalists and reporting of foreign journalists from Jammu and Kashmir, because that will not be a guided tour. If you want the observation, if you want any election observation to be fair, then you do not get to choose who the judges will be. If I get to decide who the judge here will be, of who wins or loses this debate, then that is not going to be a fair assessment. Mr. Omar Abdullah was trying to and very clearly pointed out that this is not a fair assessment by anybody as long as you pick and choose who the observers are going to be. If the BJP government is truly confident of its position in Jammu and Kashmir, it should not ban the entry of foreign journalists.
But if, Mr.
That is the point he was making.
If I may ask you,
also,
one second, just on that, shouldn't the judges, if the words that you use, the people who judge or assess the legality or the free and fair nature of this election, one second, shouldn't they be the people of Kashmir? And if the people of Kashmir have, I think today's provisional vote is at 61%, I believe it'll go up by a couple of percentage points. Give me 10 seconds, let me finish. Shouldn't it be the people of Kashmir who are the judge of this? 61% people provisionally have turned out to vote today. Like I said, there are zero major instances of violence that have happened today or in the previous phase that happened a few days ago. Shouldn't they be the judge? Why do you think that just some foreign observers, a delegation of 20 people coming in and watching an election suddenly makes them judge, jury and executioner?
Yeah. Let's begin by the fact that we have not made anybody the judges of this election. It is the BJP government that is called in the observers. And this is a question you must be asking the BJP spokesperson, saying, shouldn't the people of Jammu and Kashmir be the election observers rather than foreign diplomats who you're getting somehow from different countries and desperately trying to get that Western, somehow we need that, they need the Western validation, which they also put in very selectively. So this is a question you need to ask the BJP spokesperson. We have not gotten them.
No,
The BJP
I asked
spokesperson.
Ajay Alok this, but let me get the other two guests also before I go back to the political spokespersons. Aarti Singh Tikku, on both those points, Ifra Jan says this is a guided tour. You take exactly where these observers should go. You show them the nice parts of Kashmir, and then you send them back home. How do you respond to that? And second, if you're so confident about the ground situation in Kashmir, why don't you allow foreign journalists to travel there and to report from there?
Well, Zaka, first of all, let me tell you, I've been in Kashmir in last month and this month as well, and I've been going around talking to people. And what I can really tell your audience today is that it is a moment of celebration because I did not see any security forces. I did not see any kind of rioting, stone pelting, any kind of violence anywhere. And it almost felt like as if I was witnessing polling in any urban center of India, anywhere in the country, actually. So that is, I think we should pat ourselves in the back. I think we have done something commendable nationally, and even we have an occasion to showcase our democracy, especially at a juncture when the democratic world is in itself a moment of crisis. We have seen how elections in the United States of America, the self-proclaimed oldest democracy of the world, in fact, the elections have been controversial, and India has every reason and incentive to showcase its democracy. We have nothing to hide. Second, about the guided tour, it is really ironic that the National Conference, starting from Sheikh Abdullah, Farooq Abdullah, and now to Omar Abdullah, never objected about American diplomats, American journalists, the UK diplomats and journalists coming in. In fact, Sheikh Abdullah was hobnobbing with some of them from early on, and that's why Sheikh Abdullah had eventually was incarcerated for his seditious statements and his role. Apart from that, this guided tour again is very strange, this allegation.
Okay.
The fact is that United Nations Military Observer Group, whose office is next to Farooq Abdullah's house here in Gupka Road, I never saw Farooq Abdullah or Omar Abdullah objecting to that office. I never saw them saying that why is this international organization sitting here. I never saw them saying that why. In fact, they are the ones who are repeatedly seeking international intervention.
Okay.
They are asking India to have a conversation with Pakistan, whereas Pakistan actually is not even a party in Kashmir.
Okay.
The only issue that India has is actually of Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, on which both father and son have been completely silent. But third point, Zaka, just give me one more minute. In fact, in the last 35 years, there have been guided tours of journalists coming from UK, Europe, US, who were guided by either the JKLF or the Hurriyat Conference or people sympathetic to National Conference. And the guided tour eventually produced anti-India hatred, anti-India bigotry, and a complete anti-India narrative. I think that's the kind of guided tour the National Conference actually likes.
Let me ask Professor Amitabh Mattu. Professor Amitabh Mattu, there are again two parts to this. The fact that this cycle of elections is happening for the first time in almost a decade now, and certainly the first time after the abrogation of Article 370, when there was a lot of concern about whether or not it'll spiral into violence, whether there will be terrorist incidents that would derail the polls. In fact, one of the reasons why it was so delayed was because of these security concerns. The fact that at least the first two phases have passed off very peacefully, like I said, no known large instance of violence. The participation rate, the turnout has been fairly high, above 60%, irrespective of who is observing it, who has been given access to where, what rosy picture or non-rosy picture of Kashmir is being presented and by who. Shouldn't this itself be a celebration of the fact that democracy in some form has come back to the Kashmir Valley, and it is seeming on the face of it free, fair and certainly peaceful? Shouldn't that itself be celebrated by across the political mainstream, and particularly the mainstream political parties in Kashmir?
Let me put your question in a context, Zaka. First of all, I think there is a global trend towards having observers for elections. There are nearly 30 organizations, and I have been actually part of a delegation to observe elections in various parts of the world. So there are NGOs being invited, academics being invited. So there is this trend, which is not a way of just validating, but just to also showcase, more importantly, to share best practices. So this is not unique. Of course, it's happening in Jammu and Kashmir, and that is something that is exciting. And in an ideal world, hopefully, you'll allow journalists, when the security situation is appropriate, to allow them to cover the elections as well. But I think this is a great beginning, that you have a large number of foreign diplomats. And remember, they have their own credibility at stake. They will not rush off to issue propaganda statements just because they're there in Kashmir right now. Secondly, I agree with you completely, and I think this was the point made earlier also. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. The fact that you have had two phases of polls happening in Kashmir, where 50 seats have already gone to the polls, and there have been no accusations of malpractices by any of the major parties or even one of the minor parties. All that there is talk about is whether New Delhi is supporting one party or the other, but that's street gossip in Srinagar. It is, frankly, in my lifetime, I have never seen, and I'm not in the valley, let me also add that, the most inclusive elections, because you have not only the full spectrum of public opinion in Kashmir or Jammu and Kashmir represented in terms of the candidates, but also in terms of polling. Who could have imagined that even a contest, even a constituency which had a large section of Kashmiri Pandits would have double-digit figures in terms of polling?
Yeah.
Even Srinagar, you begin to see whether it is Lal Chowk or whether it's Chandpura or whether it is other constituencies, you have a large turnout. And as you said, peaceful, without pressure, free and fair. Frankly, we should be celebrating this movement. This is not the end of the road. This is not the arrival of Naya Kashmir, but this is a celebration of people's desire to have an elected government and a willingness to actually go out and vote. And hopefully, you will have statehood restored to Jammu and Kashmir, and you can then have a much more empowered assembly. But frankly, there will be contrarians. You have to give space in a democracy for dissent and for the kind of voices which might say, oh, ideally we should have had more observers, or ideally, why do we need validation? But this is a global trend, frankly speaking. Everyone goes and observes elections wherever they are. I have done so in Central Asia and elsewhere. For observers, I think it's a very exciting cultural as well as a political experience.
You know, Ifra Jan, you got to please respond to what Dr. Mattu is saying. I mean, he's not coming from a political partisan, spokesperson. He's somebody who has observed and has been a student of Kashmir politics for the last 30, 40 years. And if he's saying that this is the most peaceful election he's seen in his lifetime, surely there must, I mean, for me in this program, I can't think of a better validation for what a good election cycle this has been. Please respond to that.
Zaka, number one, I would like to say this is not a comment on any of my esteemed co-panelists, but none of us really are apolitical or completely non-political. We clearly have our own political biases, and we of course do show those biases when we come and speak. And I wasn't in national conference all my life. I was also a non-political person, but that's beyond the question. First things first, what I got to hear from this discussion is that we will allow the foreign diplomats to come in because they will present the kind of picture we want them to see and what we want presented. But we will not have the foreign journalists because they will do propaganda and they will build an anti-India narrative. So, okay, that point is clear. We will decide who comes and sees what we want to showcase. Therefore, we will get to decide what the report is going to be.
But that inherently assumes, Ifra, that the diplomats are going to be parroting the line of government of India. You are undermining, who they are and what.
I honestly would want to speak without interrupting.
No, I also have limited time, so I need to go to Ajay Alok also after this.
That's first.
So quickly,
thing.
please.
Okay, second thing, you talked about free and fair election. Right after the Lok Sabha election, when we saw people coming out in large numbers, Government of India, BJP government for that matter, using its exclusive parliamentary powers, read down whatever little powers people of Jammu and Kashmir had in the UT of Jammu and Kashmir. And it gave more powers to the Lieutenant Governor. It literally left people of Jammu and Kashmir with no powers. Which is why you see that in these elections, you actually have a lower voter turnout than what you did 2 months back. Is this a free and fair election where you...
Anyway, again, I have covered many elections in my life. One thing I've learned is never compare a Lok Sabha election with an assembly election. Anyway, I'm really running out of time. But Ajay Alok, to the point that Ifra Jan and other critics against the central government are making is that you often dismiss foreign commentary. Articles written by Western press like New York Times, Washington Post, you say you don't subscribe to those views, you don't care about those views, but simultaneously by giving out these invitations, by bringing these diplomats, you are seeking foreign validation for Naya Kashmir. How do you respond to that criticism? No, let Ajay Alok respond, please. Thank you.
First of all, this is new India. We don't need a validity certificate from any other country. Like I said, what we did was to showcase our democracy, the strength of our democracy, the depth of our democracy, and that ANC cannot understood. Now, my Congress friend must clear his position right now because National Conference wants to bring back Article 370. Is Congress is with them or not with them? That point must be made clear. Rahul Gandhi is with Omar Abdullah on this part, that Article 370 is going to be restored. Because whatever development we have seen, whatever the decrease in the terrorist activities, or for that matter, any ill-gotten activities has come down. It's just after the abrogation of Article 370. Now, here's the manifesto who claims we should have a talk to Pakistan. We will abrogate, we will restore Article 370. What is the stand of Congress? That should be very clear because Rahul Gandhi goes there and he gives just statements on the line of separatists. He says, "यहाँ पे कोई बाहरी आके राज कर रहा है." What does that mean? Doesn't he consider Kashmir as an integral part of India? कि कोई बाहरी आके राज कर रहा है? He tries to instigate people on the wrong lines, which is dangerous trend.
Okay, I have 30 seconds, Amitabh Dubey. Quick response because he invoked your party.
Rahul Gandhi is talking about the fact that an unelected LG has been given all power in the state, which has been downgraded to union territory, not been given its rightful role as a state. This entire narrative, like I said, we celebrate the fact that this is a successful election. But let us remember that in 2008, the election turnout was higher at 60%. In 2014, it was 66%.
What about on the 370
Article
question?
370, we have repeatedly said it is not on our agenda. Just like the BJP, when it allied with the PDP, did not bring the Pakistani rupee in and other proposals that the PDP has made.
Okay.
We will form a government with our alliance partners.
All right. We'll leave it at that. I'm afraid I'm completely out of time. Really sorry about this, but we have to go to this second segment on the show. It's an interview with one of the most renowned political scientists and political scholars in the world. He, of course, has a view on the conflicts that are ravaging the world right now, whether it is Russia-Ukraine or whether it is Israel-Hamas, and now there's a new front with Hezbollah. But when I sat down with Professor John Mearsheimer from the University of Chicago, I started off by asking him about the developments in his own country, in the United States, where there is a huge election, perhaps the most consequential election in an entire generation, and certainly one that is too close to call as of right now. This is our exclusive interview with Professor John Mearsheimer from the University of Chicago. So let's try and make sense of which way the US election is poised to go, because the consequences of who's going to be the next occupant of the White House, those consequences are going to be far and wide. It's going to have an impact on the Israel-Hamas war and also on the Russia-Ukraine war. Joining us now is Professor John Mearsheimer. He's Professor Emeritus at the Department of Political Science at the University of Chicago. Thank you very much, Professor, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18.
My pleasure to be here.
All right, let's start with the polls in America. There is obviously huge interest around the world in these elections in the U.S. It's arguably one of the closest that we're seeing in almost a generation in U.S. presidential contests. So we've just done an average of all the polls that have been out in the month of September, and the average reads as follows. Kamala Harris with 49.2% of the popular vote, and Donald Trump with 45.8%. So there's about a 3-4% gap between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump as of today. What is your reading of where the presidential contest stands right now? Who would you put your money on to be the winner in November if you were a betting man today?
Well, all I would say is that you want to remember that in the United States, the popular vote does not determine who becomes the president. If it did, Hillary Clinton would have won in 2016. It's where the votes end up in the Electoral College. And that means that a series of swing states in the United States really determine who becomes the president. There are a number of states that are going to go for Kamala Harris no matter what. And there are a number of states that are going to go for Donald Trump no matter what. And the critical question is what happens in the swing states. And if you actually look at what's going on in the swing states, Donald Trump is doing very well. This is not to say he's doing much better than Kamala Harris, but he's basically neck and neck, if not slightly ahead in a number of those swing states. So Donald Trump could very well end up being the president, even if he loses the popular vote.
So what explains that, especially what we've seen, not just in the first term of Donald Trump, the kind of almost chaos that we saw when he was president, and then thereafter in 2020, after he lost the election, the whole insurrection and so on, and then multiple felony charges that have been brought against him. And despite all of that, if he's still competitive, as you're saying, and perhaps even leading in some of those swing states, then what explains it?
Well, the fact is that there are fundamental political differences between Americans, and there are a lot of people who think that the Democrats are the font of all evil. And almost no matter who is the Republican nominee, they'll vote for that Republican. Many Republicans fully understand that Trump has all sorts of liabilities, but they think that Trump with liabilities is better than the Democrats. So it's just important to understand that these deep fissures in the American body politic make it possible for someone like Donald Trump, despite all his legal troubles and other troubles, to be competitive.
The journey of Kamala Harris, and as you'd expect, there is a great amount of interest in Harris here in India because of her origins, her ancestry. She was not the nominee of the Democratic Party. It was Joe Biden. Joe Biden had a disastrous debate performance back in June, where it was visible to everyone that he's not there mentally up there for this job, and then he withdrew. What do you make of Harris's journey thereafter, from Biden withdrawing, the fact that she managed to close out the nomination quite quickly, had a bit of a tepid phase after the convention, but then after the debate, which was in the second week of September, she seems to have had a bump up again. What do you make of the trajectory of Kamala Harris in the last 2 or 3 months?
Well, she has a number of liabilities. She was not highly regarded before she became a candidate. I don't think she is especially good at articulating her views on foreign policy and on domestic policy. And she has the problem that she's seen as being joined at the hip with Joe Biden. She is the vice president, so she is running on the administration's record. But those problems notwithstanding, I think she has done, by almost all accounts, a brilliant job of running the campaign. since she became the nominee after Joe Biden stepped down. She's done a great job, and that's why she is doing so well. What actually happens in the end in early November is hard to say. But you have to admit, I think, that Kamala Harris has done the best possible job given the difficult circumstances that she was facing once she became the nominee.
The polling that we've had most recently seems to indicate that, as you said earlier, Trump seems to be leading in many of what's called the Sun Belt states, Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina. But in the Rust Belt, which is Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, it is a narrow lead for Harris. Do you see her path to 270 easier than that of Trump's, or is Trump's path to 270 easier than that of Harris?
I mean, it's almost impossible to say. There's so much time left between now and the vote in early November that anything could happen. Trump could stumble, and Harris could stumble. It's just very hard to say, how this is going to play out. And furthermore, as you well know from the Indian case, and I well know from the American case, you can never trust polls too much because polls sometimes get it wrong. So figuring out who's going to win this election at this point in time is almost impossible.
That happened in 2016 too, when almost all the polls were suggesting that it would be a landslide win for Hillary Clinton. There was, in hindsight, a sort of under-reporting and under-counting by the pollsters of the Trump voter for whatever reason. Do you see that being the case 8 years down in this election cycle as well, or do you see that having changed? Because Trump is no longer an unknown entity. Everybody knows whether you like him or dislike him. He's not an unknown commodity.
I think that, number one, there's so much dissatisfaction with the Democratic Party, especially with Joe Biden, that I wouldn't be surprised if there are lots of people who are going to vote for Trump, but just won't admit it. The fact is that in polite company, you don't want to admit that you're going to vote for Trump if you're going to vote for Trump. And number two, I have a number of friends who will not admit that they're going to vote for Trump, but I have a strong sense that when they go, into the voting booth, they will pull the lever for Trump because of their dislike of the Democrats. Moreover, you want to remember that there are a lot of people who are deeply angry about the Biden administration who cannot bring themselves to vote for Trump, and they'll vote for someone like Jill Stein or some other independent candidate, or maybe just not vote at all. And if that happens, that will play to Trump's advantage, because a lot of those people would have otherwise voted for Harris, for Kamala Harris. And by the way, you see this with the Arab American community. There is huge dissatisfaction, as you can appreciate, inside of the Arab American community with the Biden administration, in large part because it's been supporting the genocide in Gaza. And the end result of that is a lot of those people are not going to vote for the Biden administration, are not going to vote for Kamala Harris, and that will hurt her. But again, how this all plays out in November is very hard to say.
All right, I want to come to some of the ramifications of the vote and the fallout of whoever is going to be the next president. What may that be on first the two wars that we're pressed with? Since you started with the Israel-Hamas war, let me ask you that. Do you see any significant positional difference between Trump and Harris, depending on who comes to the White House, and how that may impact the war? Do you reckon if Harris were to become president, she might pressurize Netanyahu more for a ceasefire than if Trump were to be president?
No, I don't think it'll make any difference at all. I think whether you have Trump or you have Harris in the White House, we will support Israel unconditionally. This is just the way American politics works. There's no president on the horizon who could put any meaningful pressure on Israel. It's just not going to happen.
But how can this go on? It's going to be close to a year now since the war against Hamas started. More than 40,000 people have died. And now there is a new front that Israel has seemingly opened against Hezbollah in the northern part of that country. I mean, many say this is untenable.
Well, you want to remember that the Ukraine war is heading towards its third year. So these wars can go on for a long time. I don't see the war in the Middle East ending anytime soon. And even if you get a ceasefire, as you well know, there is going to be a conflict of one sort or another between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and between Hezbollah and the Israelis, and maybe even between the Iranians and the Israelis over time. I mean, there's really no hope of putting an end to this colossal disaster in the Middle East.
Do you see this continuing in a way that Iran will eventually have to get in the mix, if you will, because Israel's battling Hamas on the south, Hezbollah in the north, and there's also the Houthi attacks that are happening from time to time, and all of these are basically proxies for the Iranian regime?
Well, I think there is a serious possibility that the Iranians will have to come in. And it won't involve Hamas, and it won't involve the Houthis. It'll involve Hezbollah. It appears that the Israelis are deeply interested in escalating the conflict with their conflict with Hezbollah. It's obvious that their first goal is to try to coerce Hezbollah to end its firing of rockets and missiles into Israel. This is a huge problem for Israel, and the Israelis are bashing Lebanon and Hezbollah in particular for the purpose of trying to coerce Hezbollah to stop firing those missiles. But I think there's an alternative or a second goal here, and that is to inflict enough damage on Lebanon that Iran comes into the fight. The Israelis are itching to get the Iranians and the Americans into a war. There's just no question about that in my mind, and in the minds of most people I know who study this issue. So I think the Israelis would like it very much if Iran comes or tries to come to the rescue of Hezbollah, in which case the Americans will surely come in, and then you'd have a war between the United States and Iran. And of course, the Israelis would be allied with the United States. This is a long-term goal of the Israelis, and this conflict with Hezbollah may make that happen.
If you could just elaborate on that point, because it's a very interesting point that you touch upon. A, why would Israel want that? Because if we're going to have an Iran-America clash, it's pretty much akin to almost like a world war. And number two, after 20 years of multiple wars, first in Afghanistan and then in Iraq, do you reckon there is a pro-war, if not an open-to-war kind of a mood in America? Because it's been anti-war since the last 20 years, in the history of the last 20 years.
Let me make a couple points. First of all, there's no question the United States does not want a war with Iran. We've made that very clear. And there's no question that the Iranians don't want a war with the United States. And indeed, the Iranians don't want a war with Israel either. Right? So it's the Israelis who want to drag the Americans and the Iranians into a fight. And what's going on here is that by hammering Hezbollah and hammering Lebanon, the Israelis are putting the Iranians in a situation where they may just have to come in to try to rescue Hezbollah and to rescue Lebanon. This is what you were getting at before, and I think that's exactly right. Well, if Iran comes in, it's very difficult for me to imagine the United States staying out. So this is the main scenario. Second point I would make to you is that you want to remember that Israel has tried twice to drag the United States into a war with Iran. First, on April 1st of this year, when the Israelis attacked the Iranian embassy in Damascus, in Syria. And we actually had a fight between Iran on one side and Israel and the United States on the other side on April 14th. So the United States and Iran have gone after each other in a very measured way on April 14th. And then on July 31st, the Israelis killed Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, in, of all places, Tehran. And the Iranians have vowed that they're going to retaliate. Well, this was designed in large part by the Israelis to drag the United States and Iran into a war. So there is no question in my mind the Israelis would like to see this war.
I want to get one more question in on Israel Hamas and Israel Hezbollah before I come to the other war, which is Russia Ukraine. I had the Israeli ambassador here in India recently on my program, and he said two things. He said the war with Hamas, at least militarily, is pretty much over. He believes Hamas today is not in a position to be able to launch another October 7th style attack. So militarily, at least he feels that the war with Hamas is coming down to a close. On the Hezbollah question, his contention was the government of Israel had been trying since October 7th, since they launched the operation against Hamas, to convince Lebanon to do something to stop Hezbollah from these daily rocket fires across the border. Diplomatically, they were not successful. Therefore, now they are trying to militarily stop Hezbollah from doing that. And his contention was this is going to be a limited operation. They are trying to raise the level of escalation with Hezbollah so high that it becomes a deterrent which would stop Hezbollah from the daily rocket fire, the daily rocket barrages into Israel. Do you buy that?
Well, let's just talk about Hamas to begin with, then go to Hezbollah. With regard to Hamas, the Israelis have not defeated Hamas. You want to remember that Benjamin Netanyahu said that his goal in Gaza was to decisively defeat Hamas. Hamas is alive and well. They've reconstituted the various battalions that comprised the fighting forces before October 7th. They have a huge manpower pool that they can draw upon. And the idea that Israel has put an end to Hamas is delusional. There's no question that Hamas is now not in a position to replicate what it did on October 7th. But that's a different matter. The key point you want to keep in mind is that they have not decisively defeated Hamas. With regard to Hezbollah, I think what you describe as the Israeli goal is correct. And I tried to make this point before, that what the Israelis are trying to do is they're trying to hit Lebanon hard enough and to hit Hezbollah hard enough that they throw up their hands and surrender to the Israelis and say, we will no longer continue to attack northern Israel in response to what you're doing in Gaza. And the question you want to ask yourself is, do you think that they will succeed? Mm-hmm. You believe that Hezbollah will roll over and surrender. I would not bet a lot of money that they will. Now, this idea that the Lebanese government can convince Hezbollah or coerce Hezbollah to cease its attacks on Israel is, again, delusional. This is not going to happen. Hezbollah is an independent actor. It's the most powerful actor in Lebanon, and the Lebanese government is in no position to coerce Hezbollah. And again, the question then boils down to whether or not you think Hezbollah will quit attacking Israel as long as Israel continues its war in Gaza. And I would bet the Israelis are not going to be successful. It's hard to say, with great certainty, but my understanding of the balance of power and the balance of resolve between Hezbollah and Israel tells me that Hezbollah will continue the fight. And this brings us to the question of whether or not the Israelis will launch a ground invasion into Lebanon. If the air campaign doesn't work, then will they be willing to send ground forces in? Mm-hmm. They did in 1982 and as they did in 2006. Yep. In my view, the Israelis are in no position to do that. And if they did so, it would be a huge mistake on their part.
Let me come to the other war, which is Russia-Ukraine. And last month, you said that a Trump victory in November would push the U.S. away from NATO expansionism, and that in a way would work in favor of Russia. It could possibly end the war. And consequently, you've also said that if Harris were to be elected as president in November, then Putin might double down on the war against Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. Could you again elaborate on that hypothesis?
Sure. Well, as I said, I don't think there's any difference between Harris on one hand and Trump on the other hand when it comes to the Middle East. But I do think there's a fundamental difference with regard to the Ukraine war. That's the one foreign policy issue where there is a deep disagreement. And there's no question that the Trump administration would like to end the war in Ukraine as quickly as possible. And I think it's quite clear that the Trump administration, or should Donald Trump get elected in 2024, would like to improve relations with Russia. And at the same time, it has little interest in continuing to maintain NATO in its present form. Harris, on the other hand, is interested in maintaining the status quo. Harris will do everything possible to back Ukraine forever and to continue this war for as long as possible. Despite that difference, what really matters here is what's happening on the battlefield. And what's happening on the battlefield is that the Russians are winning the war. If you look at the daily reports that are now even beginning to appear in the West on the balance of power on the Eastern Front and what's happening in Kursk, it's quite clear that the Ukrainians are in deep trouble. And if you look at what's happening with the air war and the extent to which the Russian Air Force and Russian air power is tearing apart the energy infrastructure in Ukraine, it's clear that Russia is going to win this war. It's not going to be a decisive victory. Russia's not going to end up conquering all of Ukraine, but it is going to end up conquering a huge slice of territory, and Ukraine is going to be wrecked. It's going to be left as a dysfunctional rump state. And whether Harris is the president or Donald Trump is the president, both of them are going to have to work out some sort of deal with the Russians to create what I would say is a ceasefire or a cold peace.
So that cold peace or a ceasefire would necessarily involve a change of the map of Ukraine as we knew it before February 2022. That is, Ukraine will have to sort of reconcile itself to conceding some amount of territory. We don't know how much that is, 20%, 25%, I don't know. But it will definitely have to concede a substantial amount of territory in the East if there were to be a cold peace.
I don't think that Ukraine will ever concede that lost territory. There's no question the Russians are taking territory and they are formally annexing that territory to Russia. So the Crimean Peninsula and those 4 oblasts in eastern Ukraine, almost all of which the Russians now control, they have been formally annexed to Russia. And the Russians have no intention of ever giving that territory back to Ukraine. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, accept the fact that the Russians now control that territory, but they will never concede, in my opinion, that that is Russian territory forever.
All right, and one final word. Just in the last few months, the Indian Prime Minister, he first went to Moscow, met with Putin. A few weeks later, he went to Kiev, met with Zelensky. And this week, on the sidelines of the UNGA, he's met with both Zelensky and Mahmoud Abbas, who is the head of the Palestinian Authority. Do you see India having any kind of a role in being able to help solve either of these two wars, or at least bring in some kind of a cold peace or a ceasefire, as you mentioned?
No, I don't think so. And I don't think anybody can do much to end the conflict in the Middle East, except for the United States. And the United States cannot put any meaningful pressure on Israel, in large part because of domestic politics in the United States. The power of the Israel lobby is so great that no American president can coerce the Israelis to change their behavior. So the Israelis are pretty much free to do what they want. And it's not possible for India to do anything in the Middle East. And with regard to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, I think that there's little India can do there as well. I mean, it may be possible that if someone is looking for a negotiator or a mediator down the road to work with negotiators from both sides, that maybe India could come into play. I doubt that, because I think India is seen as an ally of Russia by many Ukrainians. So I think that would be, hard to pull off. But I don't think India has a large role to play here. And again, it's just because of the structure of these two conflicts.
All right. Professor John Mearsheimer, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18.
It was my pleasure.
Talak.
Now, also joining us on the broadcast is my colleague Sameer Bhatt, who's joining us from Naushera in Jammu. Sameer, सबसे पहले तो जम्मू में जो वोटर टर्नआउट हुआ है, हमें ये जानकारी मिल रही है कि 10% वोटर टर्नआउट ऑलरेडी रिकॉर्ड कर दिया गया है. अभी हम सिर्फ अर्ली फेजेस ऑफ इलेक्शन की बात कर रहे हैं. इसके बारे में थोड़ा ताज़ा जानकारी दीजिए हमें.
देखिए, अगर हम राजौरी, पुंछ और रियासी की बात करें तो यहाँ पे टर्नआउट अच्छा हुआ है. रियासी की अगर हम बात करें तो 14% हुआ है. राजौरी और पुंछ में भी 12% हुआ है. और जहाँ नौशहरा में हूँ यहाँ पे भी अच्छा टर्नआउट देखने को मिल रहा है. और आप देख सकते हैं जो यहाँ पे खड़े हैं लोग अपनी बारी का इंतज़ार कर रहे हैं. और ये जो विजुअल्स हैं, ये जो आपको दृश्य दिख रहे हैं, ये हर जगह पे आपको यही दृश्य दिखेंगे. और लगातार लोगों का आना भी जारी है. आप देख सकते हैं हमारे साथ. आप वोट डालने आ रहे हैं?
जी सर, हाँ, वोट डालने के लिए आए हैं. और यहाँ के सबसे पॉपुलर और लोगों का कुछ बनाने वाले सिर्फ रैना साहब हैं.
जी, वो आपकी अपनी है. किसको आप वोट डाल रहे हैं? इशू क्या है जो आप किन उम्मीदों के साथ नई सरकार से चाहते हैं?
सर, ये नई सरकार का हम ये चाहते हैं कि जो हमारे गांव में लंबेरी एक पछड़ा हुआ गांव था, रैना साहब ने रेड एंट्री से दिल्ली की हिस्ट्री में लिखवा दिया. ये सबसे बड़ा काम है. और इस काम के लिए अगर रैना साहब यहाँ से जीत के अब सेंटर में भेजेंगे, हमारे जो रहते हुए काम हैं इन्होंने बहुत यहाँ से डेवलपमेंट की है. लेकिन हम ये उम्मीद करते हैं कि रैना साहब यहाँ से जीत के जाएं, सेंटर से कुछ अमाउंट लाएंगे और इलाके की आगे तरक्की होगी. हम इसी पे उम्मीद रखते हैं.
10 साल के बाद है. और जब यहाँ पे गाँव की बात कर रहे हैं, गाँव में अपने अपने मसले हैं, मुश्किलात होती हैं. आपको क्या लगता है? बहुत सारी चीज़ें तो हुई हैं, जो अभी तक नहीं हुआ है वो क्या क्या है?
रैना साहब ने यहाँ के तो 4 चांद लगा दिए, रास्ते बना दिए, सड़कें बना दी, स्कूल सीधे कर दिए. आप ये उम्मीद करते हैं कि ये यहाँ के जीत की जाएंगे और जो काम रहते हैं उनको ये पूरा कर पाएंगी.
ठीक है, कुछ लोगों से जो युवा हैं उनसे भी बात करें. आप युवा हैं, पहली बार वोट डाल रहे हैं?
नहीं,
सेकंड बार है. क्या आप चाहते हैं? उम्मीदें क्या हैं नई सरकार से? जो आपके चुने हुए लेजिस्लेटर, उनसे क्या चाहते हैं?
अच्छा करें और क्या कर सकते हैं.
आपने पढ़ा है?
हाँ.
कितनी तक पढ़ाई की?
मैं 10th.
अच्छा, तो यहाँ पे आप क्या चाहते हैं? बेरोजगारी क्योंकि
दूसरे फेज की पोलिंग जो है सुबह से शुरू हुई है. फिलहाल जो रिपोर्ट्स हैं, अच्छी तादाद में वोटर जो है अपने वोट का इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं. अब मुझसे बार बार पूछा जाता है कि हमारी क्या उम्मीदें हैं, हमारी क्या एक्सपेक्टेशंस हैं. कोई भी उम्मीदवार हारने के लिए इलेक्शन नहीं लड़ता. तो हमारे एक्सपेक्टेशंस यही हैं कि आज ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा वोट.
The forum that sets the national agenda is back.
When there are elections in a country and they give you results you don't like, you call them electoral autocracy.
With an unmatched legacy across India's important cities.
There is no such thing as a BJP foreign policy or a Congress foreign policy. There's only India's foreign policy.
Featuring policymakers at the heart of shaping the nation and economy.
It was this government which has amended the minimum alternative tax.
Alongside India's most iconic voices from diverse fields.
सोनू के टीटू की स्वीटी वो फिल्म थी जिसने मुझे घरों तक पहुंचाया.
Bangalore is absolutely the startup capital of the country.
To spark debate and engage in uninhibited conversations.
एकनाथ जी मुख्यमंत्री बनेंगे, ये बात तो मुझे पहले से पता थी.
In the only town hall that matters and about to get bigger, better and more impactful. CNN News 18 Town Hall.
नेशनल कॉन्फ्रेंस के उम्मीदवारों को पढ़ेंगे. जहां नेशनल कॉन्फ्रेंस के उम्मीदवार नहीं है वहाँ कांग्रेस के साथ हमारे अलायंस के तहत कांग्रेस के उम्मीदवार को जो है वोट मिलने चाहिए और उम्मीद ये की जा रही है कि 8 अक्टूबर के बाद अक्सरियत हमारी होगी और नेशनल कॉन्फ्रेंस कांग्रेस की यहाँ पे अलायंस गवर्नमेंट जो है काम करेगी। यही हमारी उम्मीद है। ये डेलीगेशन के हवाले से समझ में नहीं आता, यही लोग जब जम्मू कश्मीर के बारे में कमेंट करते हैं तो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया की तरफ से बयान आता है कि जम्मू कश्मीर जो है वो हमारा अंदरूनी मामला है, इस पर दूसरों की दखल नहीं होनी चाहिए। अगर दखल नहीं होनी चाहिए, अगर इनके कमेंट्स आपको नहीं चाहिए तो इनको यहाँ लाया क्यों जा रहा है? और वैसे भी यहाँ लोग वोट अपना इस्तेमाल या इलेक्शन में हिस्सा इसलिए नहीं ले रहे हैं कि वो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया से बहुत खुश हैं। गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया की तमाम कोशिशों के बावजूद लोग यहाँ इलेक्शन में हिस्सा ले रहे हैं, नहीं तो यहाँ लोगों को तंग करने में, सताने में, परेशान करने में पिछले 6-7 साल से हुकूमत ने कोई कसर बाकी नहीं रखी है। इसके बावजूद लोग अगर इस इलेक्शन में हिस्सा ले रहे हैं तो ये लोगों की, मैं कहता हूँ इसका श्रेय लोगों को जाना चाहिए, लेकिन गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया कोशिश कर रही है कि इसका सारा क्रेडिट गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया को मिले, जो कि यहाँ के लोगों के साथ धोखा है। और अगर बाहर के डिप्लोमेट्स को लाया जा सकता है तो मुझे ये बताएं ना, बाहर के जर्नलिस्ट को इजाजत क्यों नहीं दी जा रही है? बाहर के किसी भी जर्नलिस्ट को जिन्होंने अप्लाई किया था इस इलेक्शन को कवर करने के लिए, उन्हें इजाजत नहीं मिली, लेकिन एक गाइडेड टूर टूरिस्ट की तरह इन डिप्लोमेट्स को लाके यहाँ इलेक्शन दिखाए जा रहे हैं, ये अच्छी बात नहीं है।
सर थोड़ा ट्रेंड साउथ कश्मीर में काफी ज्यादा सुबह से ही वोटिंग देखने को मिली, लेकिन श्रीनगर का थोड़ा स्लो है, आपको क्यों लग रहा है कि ऐसा हो रहा है?
तब हमारी वोट डालने की आदत नहीं रही है। हम श्रीनगर के लोगों को 35 साल अपना वोट इस्तेमाल करने की आदत नहीं रही, हमें थोड़ा सा सीखना पड़ेगा दोबारा, मतलब घर से निकल के पोलिंग बूथ में जाना। लेकिन मैं उम्मीद करता हूं कि बाकी जो सराउंडिंग एरियाज हैं वहां के पोलिंग को देखने के बाद श्रीनगर के लोग भी निकलेंगे और अपने वोट का इस्तेमाल करेंगे, क्योंकि आखिरकार उनको भी अपने एमएलए पे जो है अपने एमएलए से काम मांगने का हक है, और वो हक जो है वोट से शुरू होता है। उन्हें अपने एमएलए को चुनने में जो है अपनी आवाज बुलंद करनी चाहिए और फिर अपने एमएलए से जो है काम मांगना चाहिए। और कुछ
national conference be able to take the lion's share in the second phase because it's all national conference.
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. For a region where 40,000 people have been killed in a war, it is hard to say that the situation is getting worse. What can be worse than this? An all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah. It will be worse, especially if Israel launches a ground offensive in Lebanon. Apparently, it's preparing for one. Can no one stop Netanyahu? Lebanon says Joe Biden can, but he won't, because his party has an election to fight and he's bankrolling one more war and giving cluster bombs to Ukraine. But Donald Trump says if he comes to power, he will stop arming Kiev. Where does that leave Volodymyr Zelensky? We'll discuss all of that. In other news, Saudi Arabia wants Pakistan to stop beggars coming in the name of the Hajj pilgrimage and staying on. China has test-fired its first intercontinental ballistic missile in the Pacific in more than 4 decades. India is seeing an IPO gold rush, but the market regulator has some concerns. Turkish President Erdogan seems to be mending his ways. For the first time in many years, he's not mentioned Kashmir at the United Nations. Indian courts debate whether trials should be live-streamed. Russia scores another win over the West in Africa, this time with a satellite deal with 3 countries. And a second death in India attributed to overwork has triggered a serious conversation on where we should draw the line. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Is Iran trying to kill Donald Trump? The US Republican presidential candidate claims there are big threats to his life from Tehran. Trump's team says the US intelligence has warned the former president, but Iran rejects the accusations. Since July, there have been 2 assassination attempts on Trump. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau faces a no-confidence vote. It's the first major test of his unpopular minority government. While the motion is not expected to succeed, Trudeau is lagging far behind in the opinion polls. The opposition Conservative Party wants a snap election. Trudeau has been in power since 2015. India is now the 3rd most powerful country in Asia. That's according to the Asia Power Index published by Australia's Lowy Institute. India overtakes Japan to reach this milestone. The driving factors include India's robust economy and young population. Staying with India, Jammu and Kashmir votes in the second phase of the assembly election. Voter turnout was more than 50%. Raisi district in Jammu recorded the highest polling percentage and Srinagar the lowest. The third and final phase of voting will take place on the 1st of October. The results will be announced on the 8th. The Philippines backs the permanent stay of a US missile system in the country. China warns that this will destabilize the region. In April, the US had deployed the Typhoon missile system. It was for the annual joint military exercises, but Washington did not pull it out of the Philippines even after the war games. And Volkswagen bosses and union workers start crunch talks. It's over the ailing German auto giant's drastic cost-cutting plans. Thousands of staff are on protest as the company mulls closing factories in Germany and deep job cuts. Volkswagen is Europe's biggest car maker. West Asia remains on the edge. It sounds like a cliche given how many times we've said this over the past few months, but that doesn't take away from the severity of the situation. A major escalation appears more likely now than it did in the past 1 year. Today, Hezbollah tried to target the Mossad. That's Israel's intelligence agency. Hezbollah fired a ballistic missile towards Tel Aviv. Sirens rang across the city. Take a look at this. The missile was intercepted before it could cause any harm, but it wasn't the only one that was fired. There's been a series of attacks in the north too, near the Israel-Lebanon border. Cross-border attacks are intensifying there. Israel has launched a major bombing operation with large-scale aerial attacks inside Lebanon. Israel dispatched 250 jets. They dropped at least 2,000 munitions on 1,600 targets in Lebanon. 1,600 targets. These attacks were carried out in 4 waves. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says they've struck Hezbollah infrastructure, including targets in the Lebanese capital Beirut, South Beirut to be precise, which is a Hezbollah stronghold. One of its commanders was killed in the strikes. Hezbollah confirmed the death today of one of their commanders. Israel claims that they've eliminated 2 more Hezbollah commanders. All in all, more than 500 people have died and over 1,800 are injured. Many of these are believed to be civilians. In fact, they seem to have suffered the maximum damage in these attacks. Look at these pictures. These were residential areas. These attacks from Israel have triggered a mass exodus in Lebanon. One report says more than 100,000 people have been displaced so far. Again, these are civilians, mostly those who had homes near the Israeli border.
Before this time, there were no strikes taking place in our hometown. We used to hear sounds of strikes in our surroundings. The day before yesterday, strikes started getting closer and Israeli planes were in the sky. For sure, we were scared bit by bit. It reached the fields outside the village and inside it. Of course, we could not stay. Everyone is scared. We carried ourselves, packed our clothes, and we left.
A new phase of war has begun. Israel's defense minister made this statement last week. In fact, Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah used the same words, a new phase of war. And that's what it is, really. Though it's not clear how far Israel plans to take it. Will Netanyahu launch a ground offensive in Lebanon? Israeli media says the IDF is preparing for one. The IDF is the Israeli Defense Force. Reports say that they had a meeting attended by Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and a team of soldiers. Apparently, these are the soldiers who are preparing for the ground offensive. Now, Israel has not confirmed this report, but more importantly, they haven't denied it. So a ground offensive is not off the table. And that makes the situation even more serious. On the other side, Hezbollah is launching retaliatory attacks. It continues to fire missiles into Israel.
During the past few hours, Safed and its periphery a heavy barrage of tens of items. Unfortunately, we had a direct hit to one of the homes in one of the neighborhoods of the city of Safed. Luckily, the family is currently staying out of the country, so this event caused no casualties. Over the past 24 hours, we have seen hits in houses where the residents stayed in safe areas, especially safe rooms, and were spared.
The global community is ringing alarm bells. Several world leaders are in New York to attend the United Nations General Assembly. Antonio Guterres has issued a strong statement. He is the Secretary General of the UN. He said tensions in West Asia have become, and I'm quoting, a non-stop nightmare, which could take the entire region down, and Lebanon could become another Gaza.
Look no further than Lebanon. We should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza.
That was a powerful statement, but the repeated appeals also expose his limitations. The United Nations has no teeth. It cannot enforce a ceasefire in West Asia or anywhere else for that matter. So all Guterres can do is make appeals for de-escalation. The need of the hour is to break this cycle of violence, because if Israel attacks Lebanon on the ground, it will force the hand of the other side, including players like Iran. Iran, as you would know, is the key sponsor of Hezbollah. It funds this organization. It trains its fighters. For the moment, Iran is calling for a ceasefire. But if Israel launches a ground offensive, it will leave Iran with no choice, really. Tehran will have to respond in kind.
Naturally blind Israeli state terrorism over the past few days in Lebanon, followed by a massive aggression with thousands of victims, cannot go unanswered. The responsibility for all consequences will be borne by those governments who have thwarted all global efforts to end this horrific catastrophe and have the audacity to call themselves champions of human rights.
Iran could be gearing up for an escalation. Reports say it has sought help from Russia. The two sides held secret talks. Iran wants cruise missiles from Russia. It wants to ship these missiles to the Houthis in Yemen. The Houthis are another proxy group of Tehran. So if Israel escalates, Iran could ask the Houthis to mobilize, possibly in the Red Sea. Whichever way you look at it, the picture looks alarming. West Asia is on the edge of a precipice.
We're still hoping the United States is the only country that can really make a difference in the Middle East and with regard to Lebanon.
There's no point expecting Netanyahu to de-escalate. He's clearly gone rogue. The only solution is to arm twist him, to force him to end this war. And who can do that? The obvious candidate is the United States of America. Even Lebanon knows this. They're staring at a full-scale war with Israel. In public, the Hezbollah may act brave, but the ground reality is quite different. Lebanon's economy cannot bankroll a long war, which is why their government is hoping for a diplomatic solution, and they want the United States to help them.
We're still hoping the United States is the only country that can really make a difference in the Middle East and with regard to Lebanon. The more we think about it, is the United States is the key to our, I would say, salvation, if I can say, use this word.
No offense here. If the US is your salvation, you're already doomed. But we get why Lebanon is saying this, because Washington is supposed to have leverage over Israel. Around 69% of their weapons come from the US, 69% of Israeli weapons. We're talking missiles, bullets, jets, all kinds of strategic weapons. Even the Iron Dome is replenished by US funding. Same with aid. The US gives Israel around $3.8 billion every year. This is mostly used to buy weapons. And don't forget the diplomatic support. Israel has killed more than 40,000 civilians in Gaza, yet their leaders face no consequences, no arrest warrant, no UN Security Council criticism, and no arms embargo. Why is that? Because of US political support. Any other country would have been isolated and sanctioned by now. But the US keeps defending Israel. Every time the UNSC tries to condemn them, the US vetoes. So yes, Biden does have leverage. He can force Netanyahu to stop this war. Then why doesn't he? Because of politics. Biden's criticism of Israel is always half-hearted. Even at the United Nations General Assembly, he blamed Hezbollah.
Hezbollah, unprovoked, joined the October 7th attack, launching rockets into Israel. Almost a year later, too many on each side of the Israeli-Lebanon border remain displaced. A full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible.
So Biden is batting for peace and diplomacy. But guess how he's trying to achieve it? By sending tons of weapons to Israel. I have some numbers for you. The US has sent 500 plane loads of weapons to Israel since October last year. 500 full planes of weapons. Plus nearly 107 ships full of weapons. Put together, that's 50,000 tons of weapons. Is this how you stop a war? By sending more weapons. Just last month, Biden approved another arms package. It's worth around $20 billion. Israel will get fighter jets, missiles, and tank rounds from the US. The only restraint we saw was in the month of March. That's when Biden paused one arms shipment to Israel, just one. You cannot call that a policy change. That was a symbolic move, one that Netanyahu brushed aside, which brings us back to the same question. Why isn't the US doing more? The simple answer is vote bank politics. The United States has nearly 7.5 million Jews, and they could decide who ends up in the White House. The Jewish voters. How? Just look at Pennsylvania. It's a key swing state in the US electoral map. Joe Biden won this state in 2020 by just 80,000 votes. And how many Jewish voters does Pennsylvania have? 300,000. Now, traditionally, American Jews prefer the Democrats. Polls suggest that 69% lean Democrat, only 29% of the Jewish voters lean Republican. But what happens if some of them defect? If they vote for Donald Trump instead of Kamala Harris? She could lose important swing states. Which is why Joe Biden is not doing anything to rein in Israel. His hypocrisy is clear for all to see. At the UNGA, he dropped a supposed pearl of wisdom. He said people are more important than staying in power.
My fellow leaders, let us never forget, some things are more important than staying in power. It's your people. It's your people that matter the most.
He forgot to add a caveat. People in Gaza do not fall under this bracket, nor do civilians in Lebanon. When it comes to them, I guess staying in power is more important. But forget the people of Gaza or Lebanon. Why doesn't Joe Biden listen to his own people? They are protesting across US